The pen felt heavier than it should have, as if the ink itself carried the weight of every year she had spent becoming invisible in this marriage. The room was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your own breathing sound like a confession. Across the polished table, he watched her with narrowed eyes, waiting, no, hoping, for a crack. A tremble in her hand. A sudden outburst. Something he could point to later and say, see. She was unstable, but she gave him nothing. She read the first line, then the second, her eyes moving steadily, deliberately, as though this were not the document dismantling her life but a simple form at the bank. The lawyer cleared his throat, uncomfortable with her composure. Everyone in the room expected drama. After all, she had been the one betrayed, the one humiliated by whispers that had traveled faster than the truth. Yet there she sat, spine straight, face calm, lips pressed into something that almost resembled relief. He shifted in his chair, irritation creeping into his voice. You don't have any questions? He asked, leaning back as if already victorious. For years, she had asked too many questions. Where were you? Why are you late? Do you still love me? Each one had been met with half answers and cold dismissals. Today, she shook her head. No questions. She had finally learned that some answers were never worth hearing. The memory of the night she found out flickered through her mind like a scene from someone else's life. The glowing phone screen, the unfamiliar name, the messages that left no room for doubt. She remembered how her hands had trembled then, how her heart had raced as if trying to escape her chest. But that woman no longer sat at this table. That woman had cried herself to sleep, had begged silently for a version of him that never truly existed. She reached the last page and paused, just long enough for him to smirk. He mistook her stillness for hesitation. It fed his ego, convinced him he still had power over her. He didn't see what she saw. The fine print he had rushed through, the clauses her own lawyer had insisted on, the quiet safeguards built for a moment exactly like this. While he had been busy planning his exit, she had been planning her survival. The pen touched the paper. The sound was sharp, final. Her signature flowed smoothly, a practiced curve she had perfected over months of preparation. With each stroke, something inside her loosened. The anger, the shame, the constant ache of trying to be enough for someone who thrived on her doubt. When she finished, she slid the papers forward, her fingers steady, her face unreadable. That's it? He asked, confusion flickering across his features. No tears, no accusations, no last attempt to change his mind. She met his gaze then, really looked at him, and felt a surprising absence of pain. He looked smaller somehow, less certain than the man she had once built her world around. That's it, she said softly. She stood, smoothing her coat as if leaving a routine appointment. The lawyer began gathering documents, the room buzzing with the unspoken tension she had refused to carry. As she walked toward the door, she felt his eyes on her back, searching for regret, for desperation, for any sign that this moment had broken her. She didn't look back. The door closed behind her with a quiet click, and in that sound was the end of a chapter she had outgrown, and the beginning of something he would never see coming. The night air hit her like a warm embrace as she stepped out of the sleek black car, the city lights reflecting off the glass of the skyscrapers around her. She didn't rush, didn't glance over her shoulder to see if he had followed or if gossiping neighbors had caught sight of her. She walked with the ease of someone who had shed every expectation, every burden that had once weighed her down. The restaurant's entrance loomed ahead, a subtle yet unmistakable sign of luxury, polished brass, soft golden light spilling onto the sidewalk, a host greeting her with a nod that spoke of quiet recognition. She didn't just enter a room, she entered a stage where the story was hers to command. Inside, the ambiance was intoxicating. Candlelight flickered across the marble tables, casting shadows that danced like whispers across the faces of other patrons, their laughter soft, inconsequential. The subtle scent of aged wine and fresh roses filled the air. She moved through it all with practiced grace, heels clicking lightly against the floor, drawing just enough attention to mark her presence without demanding it. And then she saw him, the man whose name alone had toppled empires, whose presence in any room carried weight invisible to most, but unmistakable to her. He rose slightly as she approached, a half smile of recognition that was equal parts curiosity and admiration. The table between them was set as though anticipating their arrival. crystal glasses catching the candlelight, fine china reflecting the soft warmth around them. He gestured toward the seat opposite, and she lowered herself into it with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing here, and why. There was no hesitation, no nervous laughter, no need to charm. The atmosphere itself seemed to bend in acknowledgement of her calm. They spoke briefly at first, exchanging pleasantries that masked the silent understanding developing between them. Every word she spoke was measured, deliberate, layered with intelligence and wit. Every glance he gave her was sharp, aware, and intrigued. They were two people who had mastered the art of patience, each reading the other like a book written in invisible ink. The city outside sparkled, oblivious to the quiet power exchange taking place behind these windows. Wine arrived, poured slowly into crystal glasses, the deep red liquid catching the flickering candlelight. He raised his glass, and she met him with hers, the sound of their toast resonating like a chord struck at exactly the right moment. Laughter followed, low and unforced, the kind that came not from humor alone but from the recognition of opportunity and power. They spoke of everything and nothing, the conversation dancing across business, travel, art, and life experiences, yet always circling back to a mutual understanding. Neither was here by accident. Around them, the world continued in its usual rhythm, oblivious to the story unfolding at that corner table. Waiters moved discreetly, servers adjusted napkins and polished silverware, but her attention remained fixed. She observed him closely, noting subtle details, the quiet way he leaned forward when intrigued, the sharp glint of intelligence in his eyes, the rare, fleeting moments where a genuine smile slipped through the polished exterior. She had seen powerful people before, men who thought influence alone could command respect. But he was different. He recognized power not as something to be displayed, but as something to be shared, strategically, deliberately, with the right partner. By the time dessert arrived, the atmosphere had shifted. What had begun as a casual, high-profile dinner had transformed into something charged with potential. She wasn't just a guest at this table, she was a force, a presence that changed the rhythm of the room, compelling him to match her pace, her focus, her vision. And for the first time that evening, she allowed herself a small, private smile. The night was young, the city sprawling endlessly beneath them, and for the first time in a long time, she felt entirely untouchable, entirely alive. Morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, scattering across sleek marble floors and casting long, golden patterns on the walls. She stood by the glass, a crystal flute of champagne balanced delicately in her hand, her reflection merging with the city skyline outside. The world was waking up below, oblivious to the quiet revolution she had ignited in her own life overnight. The headlines on the coffee table were blurred, but she didn't need to read them to know they screamed disbelief, envy, and regret. She had anticipated this reaction, and a small, private thrill coursed through her chest at the thought of it. The divorce that had seemed like the end was, in reality, the beginning. She remembered the sterile office where she had signed the papers, the smirk of surprise frozen on his face, and the calm satisfaction she had felt as she walked out. He thought he had won, but she had been playing a game that he had never even noticed. While he had been clinging to control, she had been building leverage, networks, and alliances invisible to the untrained eye. And now, as the sunlight warmed her skin and the city stretched out endlessly before her, she could feel the full weight of her independence, her autonomy, and her newfound power. Her phone buzzed on the counter, notifications piling up like evidence of her victory. Messages from friends, admirers, and business contacts flooded in, some subtle, some gushing, all acknowledging the audacity of her move. She didn't respond immediately, she allowed herself a moment to savor the quiet. The billionaire from last night had called only once, leaving a single voicemail marked with respect and intrigue, a signal that their conversation from yesterday was far from over. She smiled, imagining the possibilities that lay ahead. Partnerships, adventures, a life untethered from the expectations of a man who had never truly seen her. She lifted the glass again, the champagne sparkling like liquid sunlight. She traced the rim with her fingers, thinking of the irony. The man who had once held her heart now only held a small corner of her past. The rest, her future, her ambitions, her desires, belonged entirely to her. She took a slow sip, feeling the bubbles tickle her senses and awaken a thrill she hadn't felt in years. Freedom tasted intoxicating, sharper than any wine, richer than any jewel. In the distance, the city stirred to life, its noises reaching her in a low hum through the glass. She felt untouchable yet connected, part of the world yet distinctly separate from its predictable cycles. Her reflection showed a woman transformed, not just in appearance, but in essence. No longer reactive, no longer waiting for permission or approval. She was the architect of her life, the strategist of her own destiny. The divorce had been the chess move everyone underestimated, the dinner, the next. And now, as she held her glass against the rising sun, the final move, the one that secured her place at the center of her own story, was already unfolding. Her mind wandered briefly to him, the ex-husband, who must have been scanning headlines, perhaps trying to piece together what had gone wrong. He had assumed that anger, tears, and pleading would be her weapons. She had chosen silence instead, patience instead, and in that choice, she had amassed more power than he could comprehend. A quiet laugh escaped her lips, soft but sharp, echoing through the room. The game had been won without a single shout, without a single confrontation, and the realization sent a shiver of triumph down her spine. As the sun climbed higher, she set her glass on the counter and turned fully toward the room, stretching like a predator claiming its territory. The city outside, the life she had always dreamed of, and the promise of opportunities unimagined lay before her. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need validation. She had something far more precious: control, choice, and the unshakable knowledge that the best move was always hers to make. And with that certainty, she allowed herself one last smile before stepping away from the windows and into the life she had been building all along.